And if you want to speak, just type speak in there, please. And we'll invite you to speak. And then you can put your video on, put your microphone on, say what you want to say, and then come back off again. Hopefully that'll be okay.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman. We're now live.
Thank you, Rachel, and welcome to you all. I hope you're all well in these difficult circumstances. Could I just ask now that Rachel gives her apologies for absence, please? Rachel?
Sorry, Chairman. We have apologies from Councillor Coupland, and I think we have apologies from Councillor Waller as well.
Thank you for that. Item 2 on the agenda is declarations of members' interests. Could you indicate, please, in the chat line whether you have an interest? Steve, please speak.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, if I can declare that I'm both a deferred and an active member of the pension fund.
Thank you, Steve. Andy?
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. Can I please declare that I am an employee of LCC and an active member of the fund? Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. No one else wishing to declare an interest, so we'll move on.
Yes, could I declare one, Mr. Chair, please? As a
Yes,
sorry,
go ahead.
as an active member of the LCC pension scheme.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
For that. Paul, I hope you're aware that you can type speak in the chat box. That's if you
Sorry, can you just enlighten me which box that was again, please, Mr. Chair?
The black bar, when you press on the screen, there's a black bar that's got the microphone, etc. And there's a square speech bubble. If you click on that, it opens up a line down the side, and then you just type in speak, and then hit enter, and then you'll be.
I've got it. I've got it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.
Right, moving on then. Item 3 on the agenda, minutes of the previous meeting held on the 11th of June. We have the minutes on page 5 and page 6 of the agenda. Could I have a proposer, please, that these minutes are an accurate representation of the meeting? A proposer, please.
I'll propose.
Happy to pick that.
Sorry. Without you, I don't know who's speaking unless you put your video on. Who's proposing?
I will propose, Eddie.
Thank you, Cleo. Could I have a seconder, please?
I haven't put chat up. It's Mike. Happy to second.
Thank you, Mike. Rachel, would you call the vote, please?
Thank you, Chairman. If you can say for, against or abstain when I call your name. Councillor Stringill.
For.
Councillor Adams. I don't think he's here. Councillor Bootroyd.
For.
Councillor Key.
For.
Councillor Perrotton-Williams.
For.
Councillor Mrs Rawlins.
For.
Councillor Dr Thompson.
For.
Mr Antcliffe.
For.
And Steve Larter.
For.
Thank you. That's all in favour, Chairman.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, committee. Rachel has my electronic signature and she will sign these accordingly as a true record. Moving on then to item 4 on the agenda is the Independence Advisors Report. Could I invite Peter Jones to give his report? Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Chairman. I hope you can all hear me. let me concentrate on what has changed since I wrote the report a couple of weeks ago. I should, by the way, have called the coronavirus not an epidemic, but more properly a pandemic, which it obviously is. Aside from coronavirus and the global economy, which I'll come to in a moment, I think the event of the last fortnight has probably been the deteriorating relationships between China and the rest of the world, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom. Is this harmful? I think it might be, but I'm not absolutely sure. It may well mean fewer imports from China and therefore more production in the Western world and hence more jobs. So it could be beneficial. But I'm somewhat puzzled as to what the Chinese motive is. If they're an export-orientated nation, why would they want to upset their principal customers? I've always regarded the relationship between the United States and China as one of almost an unhappy marriage, but we'll see how this develops. As for coronavirus, Chairman, that seems to be receding in the Northern Hemisphere, obviously with the notable exception of the United States. Both Brazil and India are in a pretty woeful condition, but otherwise I think we can assume that the virus for the time being is receding. There are, of course, pockets of it remaining. The biggest one outside the United States, I think, is in Melbourne, Australia. And of course, we've got Leicestershire in close to home. I think, Chairman, the $64 question is, will the virus return in the autumn and winter? I mean the Northern Hemisphere, autumn and winter. Turning to the economy, there have been obviously some dire numbers of economic output in the second calendar quarter. Some countries have seen production down. If you compare the second calendar quarter of 2020 with the same one in 2019, down 15 to 20%. So absolutely without precedent, as you're all well aware, but that's history. There is now a recovery in trade. Whether that means the world is normalising, I think it's too early to say. But clearly 2020 as a whole will be difficult for everyone, private individuals, companies, governments, central banks. You've probably read in the press and on the television various pundits talking about the shape of the economic recovery, characterised by capital letters, and the typical ones are V for a rapid recovery, L for one that's long delayed, and U for something more gradual. I prefer not to be sucked into this sort of forecast, because I think they assume that there's going to be no recurrence of the virus in the autumn and winter. And I, and no doubt you as well, are only too well aware there are still in the United Kingdom over 500 new cases of coronavirus every week. So it is by no means eradicated. Which brings me naturally, Chairman, to investment markets. They are still within more or less 10% of their all-time highs. The exception to that, as you're probably aware, is the United Kingdom, because of the Brexit uncertainty, I suspect. Lots of commentators regard global equity markets as ridiculously overpriced. And they say that on the basis of the typical fundamental measures that are used for equity markets, The two obvious ones are dividend yield, the dividend amount divided by the share price, or its close cousin, the price earnings ratio. Now, dividends have already been cut severely in 2020, possibly by as much as a third. And earnings, of course, will be well down this year because of the problems of the second calendar quarter. So on fundamental grounds, equity markets are, quote, statistically dear. The conclusion these commentators reach, though, is that if an equity market is regarded as dear, therefore it must sharply fall in the coming months. And that is the assumption which I challenge. For me, the key fundamental is nothing to do with dividends and earnings. It is the actions of central banks who have provided absolutely prodigious amounts of loans, grants, interest rate cuts, and so on, which you're all familiar with. Those global central banks are only too well aware of the dangers caused by coronavirus to the world economy. They are not, in my view, going to remove their support in a hurry. And indeed, if we do have a difficult winter, I suspect they're going to stand ready to provide even more support. So on that basis, I reject the fundamentals argument in favour of the cash one. But Chairman, just for a couple of minutes, let's quickly consider what the alternative investments are. US Treasury bonds, which is the biggest global market, the 30-year Treasury bond yields 1.5%. Well, that doesn't meet the requirements of our actuarial valuation. So it would be insufficient to meet the accruing liabilities of the pension scheme. So what other investments are there? Well, there's corporate bonds, and they could well be a suitable investment, but they come with the risks of default, particularly if the recession were to continue. What about property? Well, I don't think any of you are particularly enamoured of retail property nor of office property. And residential is an item on the agenda later, which could well be of interest. And alternatives, yes, interesting, but not something we can put a great deal of money into quickly. So my conclusion, to sum up, Chairman, is I still think global equities are the investment of choice. Now, I concede it might be on the basis of the least bad choice, but that remains. Can equities fall? Yes, of course they can, especially if the fears of this coming winter are to be realised. But equally, if the market were to fall, say 10%, equity markets, I think you'll see the buyers. So to sum up, Chairman, I think the fund is still well positioned and is right to stay with its asset allocation strategy.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you for your report. Yes, I agree with your last comment. Certainly, the stockbrokers of the world are always looking for opportunities, and when markets do fall, that's the time to buy in. So I've been watching it bounce around, up and down, all over the place. So nothing to fear too much. Obviously, a second spike or winter causing another coronavirus problem. Who knows? We just have to live with what we've got. But I take your last comment. But, I think the fund is well positioned. Could I invite the other members to ask questions if they wish? If so, could you please type speak in the chat? appears there are no further questions for you, Peter. So thank you for your report. I just asked that the committee note the report. There's no need to vote on it. So we'll accept that you have noted the report, and we'll move on to the next item. Thank you, Peter. Item 5, Pension Fund Update Report. If I can hand over to Joe. To you, Joe.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the standard quarterly paper, and I'd just like to highlight 2 areas here that relate to the report's recommendations. Section 7 on page 18 requests an extension to the investment consultancy contract for 1 year to 31st of December 2021. Doing this will actually allow us to wait for the good governance report to come from the Scheme Advisory Board, as I've mentioned previously at committee meetings, and that will then allow the fund time to do a governance review following that, so we can take into account any recommendations from that report and consider changes in the service we require as a result of the asset pooling. The other area is section 9 on page 18, which sets out the proposed changes to the funding strategy statement. This has been out for consultation with employers and closed on the 15th of July, and I've received no questions or concerns from that consultation. The key change to this document that you last saw in March is how admitted bodies can be brought into the fund in light of the regulation changes on exit credits. The pass-through arrangement proposal assists both the scheme employers and the contractors to better manage the pension risks within a contract, and it will also protect the fund from excessive exit payments. This pass-through arrangement is now one that's commonly being used by funds. Both of these sections had recommendations for approval. The final comment to make is just at section 10 on the training and conferences. The officers haven't attended anything since the last meeting in March, so have nothing to report back. But the committee are asked to share any training events they have attended, including any virtual ones, or if there is nothing, then I'm happy to take questions on this report.
Are there any questions from the committee? Please speak. No. Joe, on page 18 of the report, under under point 8, I should say, the actuarial services appointment, and Councillor Adams has joined myself and Peter Jones in that small group. Yes. I believe it's the 31st of July that we are meeting for the first time. I think the committee just need to know that.
Yeah, that's right. So the working group will comprise of myself, Claire Mackey, Councillor Strengle, Peter Jones. So from the 4 actuaries within the framework have been sent out to that working group. And as you said, Chairman, the first meeting is at the end of July to decide what questions we would like to ask in that call-off, and then a following meeting is in the diary for September, when we'll go through the responses from those suppliers, bringing a recommendation to October.
Thank you, Joe. I've got Councillor Mike Thompson wishing to ask a question. Mike?
It's not so much a question, it's an observation on the appendix for the voting. I noted that a lot of the votes are actually from, I think it's Invesco, are actually against the proposals put forward, which I found quite interesting. A lot of the proposals do seem to be on an assumption that they will be voted for, and Invesco vote against, which is good in my view.
Thank you. If I can just clarify that, please, Chairman. What I've actually done is just change some of the information that was provided there. I think there were about 20 or so pages of Invesco's voting report. So I actually took out all of those where they did vote in line with management, because I think it's far more important to see where they have voted against to ensure they are fulfilling the responsible investment duties that we require of them.
Thanks for that, Joe. I did find it interesting. Thank you. I must lose my hand.
Thank you, Joe. There appears to be no other speakers. We've got a bit of feedback. Can somebody turn Microphone off, please. Got feedback coming through because there's too many microphones. That's better. Thank you. The committee have got 3 parts to the recommendation. The first is to note the report, but the second is to approve the extension of the investment consultancy services contract for an additional 12 months. And thirdly, to approve the amendment to the funding strategy statement. Could I ask Rachel to call for the vote on the second recommendation and then the third recommendation, please? Over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just clarify, do you want me to do 2 separate votes or the 1 vote for both recommendations?
I think if everybody's happy and I don't see a response, we can take them both at the same time. So let's do that.
Thank you. When I call your name, please say whether you are for, against or abstaining. Councillor Strengill.
For.
Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Boutroyd.
For.
Councillor Key.
For.
Councillor Curtin-Williams.
For.
Councillor Mrs Rawlings.
For.
Councillor Thompson.
For.
Mr Ancliffe.
For.
And Steve Larter.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimous.
Thank you, Rachel. We shall now move on to item 6, which is the pension administration report. Could I hand over to Eunice, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Hello, everybody. My usual pensions admin report for the quarter up to 31st of March 20. Section 1 covers the performance and benchmarking. Section 2 on fund membership activity in terms of employers, age profile, etc. And Section 3 on the member and employer contact. The overall customer satisfaction survey for the last quarter does appear lower than previous quarters. There's no justifiable reason when we looked at the customer survey forms. People have just given us scores without any reason as to why they might have marked as low. So unfortunately, we've not been able to fathom out why that might be the case. On the employer training, just to say really that, as you can appreciate, under the current circumstances, whilst we carried out employer activity up until 31st of March, there is no employer training undertaken at the moment. However, we have now started a series of WebEx training sessions for employers, and that is about to commence in the next week or so. So hopefully we will get the employer training back, but it will be virtual training. On the disputes procedures, there were 2 cases at stage 2, nothing at stage 1. Both of those appeals were turned down. You can see the reasons for the appeals and the outcomes. There was one long-standing ombudsman case as well. That was with Lincolnshire's Legal Services. We did get confirmation very late last month that now has been resolved and is complete, and the compensation payment has been paid out. I'll focus a little bit on the administration of debt, because that's where really the major activity. Sorry. Obviously, government instructions from 23rd of March from the Prime Minister, what everybody should work home where they can work from home. We had.
Sorry, Eunice. Could I just interrupt? Sorry. Whoever it is, could you make sure that your phones are muted, please, because there's feedback coming through. Apologies, Eunice. Carry on.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. Remote working was one big major issue that we had to overcome, because most of our staff managers accepted were not enabled to work remotely. So we had a period of a couple of weeks of intense activity with the council's IT to get all our staff enabled to work remotely from home, and pleased to say really that within a short period of time all our staff had the right equipment to work from home. But whilst the equipment wasn't there, then our staff were coming in the office and keeping up the service, because we deemed ourselves to be essential workers, because we obviously pay pensions to quite a lot of vulnerable people, quite a chunk of those relying on their pensions as their main or sole income. So we obviously wanted to ensure that was continued in terms of making pension payments. So currently our office is still open. Staff come in as and when they need to, but the majority of staff work from home most of the time. The pensions regulator as well gave some advice in terms of what DB schemes should be focusing on in terms of service delivery, and as expected, the number one priority was the payment of benefits, and then followed by employer contributions, minimising risks for scams, and supporting good decision making. And we have followed pensions regulator guidance and focused on those areas. Our payroll is now, or is able to be run remotely. Staff do come in to run the payroll from the office, so just because of the large payrolls, and if there are any issues, there is IT support at hand. We instead of doing a daily payroll as we used to before, we've changed that to a weekly payroll now. So any lump sum payments, any urgent payments, we make on a Thursday every week. Pension scams is one of the key areas that the pensions regulator is focusing on, because under the current climate, there has been an increase in that activity, because unscrupulous people out there are taking advantage of people's vulnerabilities, and there is now extra requirements, extra checks that we are putting in place to ensure that anybody looking to transfer out is a genuine, they have a genuine reason to transfer out, and they're not being taken for a ride effectively. So transfers out might take a little bit longer to process because of the extra requirements and the checks we're putting in place. And similarly with transfers in from private schemes, because of the stock market drops at the early part of the COVID-19, again, making sure that people still wanted to go ahead with the transfers, even though the values may have dropped quite significantly. I won't focus too much more on anything else other than possibly the security breaches. We had one security breach in this period. That was just a minor security breach where correspondence, I think, was sent in an envelope with somebody else's. That was flagged with Bradford Council's ICO, but no further action was deemed necessary. On the council's internal audits, there were two internal audits undertaken by Bradford Council, one on accuracy of contributions on member records and one on annual benefit statements. There were a number of recommendations on the monthly returns, as we like to call the contribution records, but those are more to do with people where we receive contributions from employers where people have already left or retired. Those recommendations are forming part of our phase 3 development for monthly postings. So we'll pick those up. On the annual benefit statements, there were no non-conformities or no observations made, and we received an excellent rating for that. And it was also pointed out that the big improvement in the production of the ABS was the additional information we make available to members on the value of their benefits at a number of different ages from 55. So that certainly helped us in achieving one of our outcomes, which was a reduction in calls to our contact centre and a reduction in the number of requests for estimates of future ages. Technical update is attached to Appendix C. I'll probably mention maybe the biggest issue really undergoing at the moment is the McLeod case, and that's certainly coming to a fruition in the next few months. We're waiting for some consultation guidance coming from LGA very soon, but there will be significant impact on workloads as a result of McLeod. I'm probably pleased to say really that we expect the initial workloads in terms of data gathering not to have a major impact on us really, because one of the requirements is to get changes hours for members that are within scope of McLeod, but we've always required employees to submit changes of hours, so our records should be up to date. Shared service budget, so details at section 7 just on the budget and the cost per member and the breakdown within the various admin within the various categories. And that's where I will stop. I'm happy to take any questions from any members.
Thank you, Eunice. I have no indications of anyone wishing to speak or ask a question. I will say that pleased that you're monitoring the transfers out there. Quite a few people out there, cowboys out there, that would like an excellent pension scheme into their own types of investment. So I'm pleased that you're monitoring that. And as there's no other questions, let me thank you, Eunice, for your report. And happy to move on.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. As per usual, if I can be excused from the rest of the meeting.
Absolutely, Eunice, and thank you for your report again.
Thank you, everybody.
Right, if we can then turn to the bear with me. Just asking the committee to note the report. So we'll accept that you have noted it, as nobody seems to discuss anything. And we'll move on then to item 7, which is the employer monthly submissions update. And if I could ask Claire to join us on this one. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and good morning, everybody. This is the standard quarterly update on late and incorrect employer submissions. The report covers the final quarter of 2019-20. The number of late payments and data submissions are set out in the table on the top of page 72. And as you can see, the final quarter of the year actually showed better compliance with the regulations than previous quarters in the year. I think we were concerned that the coronavirus lockdown, which affected the February and March submissions, would have a negative impact on employers and their ability to comply with paying contributions and submitting data. However, this wasn't seen to be the case, possibly because employers and payroll providers were focused on their business critical activities. It actually improved performance. This improvement was also reflected in Table 2, which shows that there were no fines issued during the quarter. I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Claire. There doesn't appear to be any questions, so I thank you for your report and the committee. I apologise. Paper just flew out. So to note the report and consider if there are any further actions they wish to take against employers submitting late or inaccurate payments or data. I don't think there was anything. Councillor Perto Williams has said that you are pleased to hear that. So quite happy to move on. So thank you for that, Claire.
Thank you.
The report has been noted. Moving on to item 8, which is the investment management report. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This is the quarterly investment management report, and it sets out the fund's allocation to assets and overall performance, individual manager updates, and a commentary on manager performance by the investment consultant David Morton from Hymans Robertson. Section 1 of the report covers the fund's overall asset allocation and performance. This quarter was significantly impacted on the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic and lockdown, with the fund overall decreasing in value by 12.7%. As Peter Jones already mentioned in his earlier report, equities were particularly badly affected, with global equities decreasing in value by 18.4% and UK equities by 25.2%, although these have shown a recovery in quarter 1 of this financial year. Section 2 covers individual manager performance. The table on the bottom of page 77 gives manager performance in the last 3 months, 12 months, and since inception. And further detail on each manager's performance can be found at Appendix C to this report, which starts on page 85. Section 3 of the report sets out an assessment of performance of managers and their portfolios by the investment consultant David Morton. The assessment picks up various aspects and culminates in an overall ranking of 1 to 5, with 1 indicating a poor quarter and 5 indicating a stronger quarter. I'll now hand over to David to take you through this section of the paper and his thoughts on the fund manager's performances.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Chairman. This is a new format to the way that we're providing our comments and is aimed at providing a summary which will help you to focus and identify the managers which need the most attention and perhaps discussion at the meetings. A lot of the commentary in here will be familiar to those who were at the manager review meeting recently, where we also met with Invesco and Border to Coast on their global equity. As Peter's already talked about earlier on, equity markets were amongst the worst hit over the quarter, but have subsequently bounced back quite a bit. Border to Coast, our understanding is that the poor performance for the first quarter has been somewhat reversed this quarter to date, as their managers have recovered in line with markets generally. Invesco is the manager which gives us the most concern at the moment, given the length of time that they have been underperforming by, and particularly because their performance seems to diverge from what we would expect, given what we know about the mandate and how closely it's intended to track the benchmark. While equities generally have underperformed and the Border to Coast mandate also underperformed, we do think that is to be expected to a certain extent from what happened in markets, and that a future recovery can reasonably be expected from those. As we'll talk about, I think, in more detail later on, that is less clear to me from the Invesco mandate. And so I think there are still questions remaining there as to what is actually driving the underperformance of that mandate and whether it's reasonable to expect a recovery. So Invesco is where I suggest that we focus attention for the quarter. As you'll see from the table, the other mandates are much smaller by comparison in terms of absolute size of assets, but also either performed better or at least in line with what we might reasonably expect, given changes in market conditions over the period. That was all I was going to say, but very happy to take any questions.
Thank you, David. There doesn't appear to be any questions coming through. So just to come back to Invesco there, I can see that obviously the quarter they're down 16.2%, and but the MSCI, of course, is down 15.2%. So the difference, well, it says here 1.2 relative performance. It's fairly close to the MSCI, so I presume there's no cause for real concern there.
So I think in terms of the absolute performance, that's correct. The equities are down quite significantly, so Invesco are going to follow that. What's really causing the concern is that the Invesco mandate is meant to track the benchmark quite closely, and the way that they set up their model to choose stocks, there's no particular reason why they should be significantly underperforming when markets are falling. So despite markets being down, all else being equal, you would expect Invesco to still track along or perhaps outperform slightly. Now, if this had just been a single quarter, I think that would be less of a concern. But when it's an ongoing trend from what we've seen before, that's what leads us to give them the lowest rank for the quarter. And as I say, when we come on to talk about them in more detail later, it's still not clear exactly what's causing that underperformance. And if you contrast that with Border to Coast, they provided, to my mind, a much clearer explanation for what drove that and why it would be reasonable to expect a recovery in future. I'm not yet convinced that's the case for Invesco.
Okay, thank you. Just a matter of interest. Let's assume that the coronavirus hadn't happened at all. What I'm gleaning from this, and of course it's not an accurate picture, but Invesco would still be probably underperforming because I'm not saying they would ever use the virus as an excuse for their underperformance, but generally speaking, we did give them notice, so to speak, that we wanted to see an improvement when they were last in the office, giving their report. So would it be fair to say that irrespective of the virus, they still would have been a bit down?
So my best guess to that is yes. Invesco in their presentation focused significantly on the value component of their portfolio and highlighted quite rightly that value stocks in general have suffered a really tough time over recent periods, but particularly in more recent times with the coronavirus. The bit that confuses me still is that Invesco have also said that the value part of their portfolio outperformed value stocks in general. So all the evidence that they've provided seems to suggest that that part of the portfolio has actually performed reasonably well and therefore has not contributed to the underperformance. So our inference at the moment is it's actually the other parts of the portfolio, the quality and the momentum part, which seem to be actually underperforming the most. And as you say, if there had been no coronavirus, those might be the ones that would continue to trail.
Okay, thank you for that. Right, could I hand back to Claire if you've got any further comments before I move on, because there is no indication that anyone wishes to speak. There. Nothing else from you, Claire?
Nothing further from me, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Committee is asked to note the report, so therefore no vote required. We will move on then to item 9, the annual report on the fund's property and infrastructure investments. Over to you again, Claire.
Thank you very much, Chairman. This report sets out the performance on property and infrastructure elements of the portfolio over the last 12 months. The fund's strategic allocation is 9% to property and 2.5% to infrastructure. The table at the top of page 96 sets out how this is allocated. And the committee can see that the majority, some 70%, is allocated to balanced UK commercial property funds, with smaller elements in infrastructure, property venture, and a European property growth fund. Paragraph 1.5 sets out elements of the portfolio's performance against the benchmark, and you can see that all elements underperformed during 1920. As with the portfolio as a whole, this element has been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. The lockdown has caused significant disruption to real estate markets, and it's worth the committee noting that the valuation placed on the 4 UK commercial property funds and the European Property Growth Fund are subject to material uncertainty, and that's a warning which is given by the valuers of those funds. More detail on that is set out in paragraph 1.7. Sections 2 to 5 provide further information on each of the elements of the portfolio and their performance over the last 12 months. I wasn't planning on going into any detail on those, but I'm very happy to take any questions on that. Section 6 sets out the future for property and infrastructure investments by the fund and the work which is currently being undertaken by Border to Coast to develop their property offering. The goal is that we will invest with Border to Coast and that they will offer a UK property fund which is made up of direct real estate holdings. However, it's an extremely complex area and it's unlikely that this fund will be ready for investment by us until 2022. In the meantime, the fund has got property cash which is available to allocate, and that will be considered later on the agenda of this meeting. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you, Claire. No one has indicated they wish to ask any questions, so just come back to the recommendations. The committee is asked to note the report, so we'll accept that that is noted, and thank you again, Claire.
Thank you.
Moving on then to item 9, beg your pardon, item 10, which is the Lincolnshire Pension Fund Risk Register. Can I hand over to Joe, please?
Thank you, Chairman. This is the annual review of the risk register. There haven't been any changes to the risk policy that's attached to Appendix A since last year, and no changes to the risk register, which is attached to Appendix B, since the updates I took in the March paper this year. An additional risk register was created in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic, and that's attached to Appendix C, to look at the specific areas where the risk may have increased or have required additional controls. Committee members will have been sent updates on this on a regular basis. The report's recommendations are to review and approve the risk policy and the 2 risk registers. I don't intend on going through all the risks in either, but I will be very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Looking to see, but no one has indicated the wish to speak on this. So I have no comments to make, and therefore we'll come back to the recommendations. There are 3, and we'll take all 3 together. But first is to review and approve the risk management policy. Secondly, review and approve the risk register. And finally, review and approve the coronavirus risk register. So if I can ask Rachel, please, to confirm those by vote.
Thank you, Chairman. As before, if you can state for, against or abstain when I call your name. Councillor Strengill.
For.
Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Boutroyd.
For.
Councillor Key.
For.
Councillor Perrotton-Williams.
For.
Councillor Mrs Rawlins.
We've got the audio.
For.
And he's got headphones in.
Councillor Thompson.
So if you can't see it.
For.
Mr Ancliffe.
For.
And Steve Larter.
For.
Chairman, that's unanimous.
Thank you very much, Rachel. We can move on then to item 11, the Annual Pensions Committee Training Plan and Policy. Over to you, Joe.
Thank you, Chairman. This is the annual review, if I can say it properly, of the committee's training plan and policy. There have been no changes to the training policy, attached to Appendix A since last year, but the plan has been updated to reflect the expected meetings and training events for the coming year. It's suggested that the training session to be held on the 17th of September, which is already in your diaries, should cover the Border to Coast property offering, which Claire previously mentioned in the property paper, and also the options for the global equity allocation, which will be discussed in the Invesco paper later, in paper 15. We haven't set out any topics yet for the February training, but I'll be happy to ask the committee to consider if there's any areas they would like covered, or we can identify them at future meetings ahead of that February training. The report's recommendations are just to approve the training policy and to agree and identify the areas for the 2 training meetings in September and February, and also to approve the training plan. So I will be happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Joe, no questions are forthcoming. I think we need to think about it and perhaps send Joe anything that you wish to put in there, and you could send an email to Joe and copy me in, please, if indeed you think of something later, because it's important that we feed these topics in for the training purposes. So for that, thank you, Joe. If we can come back to the recommendations that the committee, as Joe has rightly pointed out, 1, 2 and 3 approve the training policy, identify and agree areas for training at September and February meetings, and approve the annual training plan. If I could hand over to Rachel, please, to go to the vote.
Thank you, Chairman. As before, four against or abstain when I call your name. Councillor Strengill.
4.
Councillor Adams.
4.
Councillor Bootroyd.
4.
Councillor Key. Councillor Key.
4.
Thank you. Councillor Perrotton Williams.
4.
Councillor Mrs Rawlins. 4. Councillor Thompson.
4.
Mr Antcliffe.
4.
Steve Larter.
4.
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimous.
Thank you, Rachel. We'll move on to item 12 on the agenda, the Pension Fund Draft Annual Report and Accounts. If I can hand over to Claire, please. Claire.
Thank you very much, Chairman. The Pension Fund Annual Report and Accounts have been prepared and they are attached to Appendix A to this report. There have been no changes to the guidance for either the accounts or the annual reports for 1920, so the document that you are looking at is very similar to that for last year. However, the accounts have been affected by the coronavirus pandemic. Details on the impact are set out at paragraph 13 and include a change to the statutory deadline for reporting and the impact that the pandemic has had, may have, on the valuation of illiquid assets, and that includes things such as property, private equity and infrastructure. Details on this are set out on page 140 of the report. Pension fund accounts, along with the County Council statements, were scrutinised by the Audit Committee earlier this week and have been published in draft. And from a pension fund perspective, these accounts will be subject to change once we've received those 31st of March updated valuations from fund managers. We're starting now to see those valuations come into us, and we would anticipate that they should all be received by the end of August and the accounts updated to meet the statutory deadline. The audit of the accounts is underway and all non-asset elements have been reviewed, and the asset work is planned to be completed in early September once we've had those updates on the illiquid assets. The work on the review of the annual report will follow after this has been completed. And we hope that we will be able to bring the report and findings from the audit back to the committee in October, along with the final version of the annual report and accounts. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Claire. No questions are forthcoming. So this time I would ask for a proposer to accept the committee's approval of the draft pension fund annual report.
Sorry, Chairman, to interrupt. Steve Larter has indicated he'd like to speak.
Steve, I've just got you there. Sorry. Carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. Last year through the audit, we had a small issue around valuations, and bearing in mind what's happened this year right at year end, do we foresee that's going to be a problem again this year, or do you think the auditors will be a bit more lenient, bearing in mind what's happened?
The issue around the valuations is exactly the same issue this year around the illiquid assets, which is why we have a set of accounts prepared at the moment based on the information which we held at the 31st of March that had been checked by our custodian. The updates that we're currently looking at and the valuation reports which we're currently receiving from managers will give up-to-date 31st of March valuations. So the position that we were at on the 1st of April was audited accounts for those funds plus roll forward cash flow movements. What we expect to receive during July and the beginning part of August is actual 31st of March audited accounts where they're available for those funds. So all being well, as long as we receive the majority of that valuation information before the statutory deadline at the end of August, that will be incorporated into our accounts. But we still have, beyond that, between the 1st of September and the account sign-off date by the auditors, which is the end of November now. We are still required to consider any updated information which is received. So if fundamentally something changed with those valuations, we would be expected to make those changes to the accounts again.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Claire. Right, back to the recommendations. I don't know. Hang on, Councillor Mike Thompson. Mike? Mike, you've indicated to speak. I've got speak in the chat box, but nobody. Mike, are you on mute? Don't know what's happened there. But, Mike, I'll give you one last chance. Do you want to speak?
He's on mute, Chairman.
Yeah, I know he is, but I can't unmute him, so he has to unmute himself.
Could I just speak, Chairman, please? It's Joe. Councillor Thompson did mention that when he used the chat function on his iPad, sometimes he was thrown out, so he may have had to come back.
I think he's come back now. Carry on, Mike.
Yes, thanks, Chairman. Sorry about that. It's technical. I'm happy to propose or second, but I did want to comment on the clarity and information in the report, which perhaps I'm biased in a sense, but as a member of the committee, but I did feel it was a very good report.
Okay, thank you for that, Mike. I'll come back to the recommendations in a moment. Paul Key. Paul, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I think to say, is everybody else experiencing problems with the meeting and that, or maybe just for me? It seems to break up a lot when people are speaking. Is that for everybody, or is it just my mind? Thank you.
I think it could be just yourself. I have no breakup on anybody, including yourself. Everything seems to be working fine from my end, but obviously I can't speak for everybody. And I don't wish to go around the whole of the committee at this moment in time. Perhaps if you have got the same issue as Paul, you can type it in the chat box. But it seems to be working fine from our end, Paul. Hopefully it'll get better for you in the future. Right, if I can move on to the recommendations. In fact, I will propose that the committee approve the draft pension fund annual report and accounts. And I think, Mike, you were happy to second that, are you?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. So we have a proposer and a seconder. If I can ask Rachel to go to the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. If you can state for, against, or abstain when I call your name. Councillor Strongill.
For.
Councillor Adams.
For.
Councillor Boutroyd. Councillor Boutroyd.
For.
Thank you. Councillor Key.
For.
Councillor Purton Williams.
For, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Mrs Rawlins. For. Councillor Thompson.
For.
Mr Ancliffe.
For.
Steve Larter.
For.
Thank you, Chairman. That's unanimous again.
Thank you, Rachel. That is carried. Item 13 is consideration of exempt information. In accordance with section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the following agenda items have not been circulated to the press and public on the grounds that they are considered to contain exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended. Press and public may be excluded from the meeting for the consideration of these items of business. So we'll accept that is noted.
So
to the recommendations.
Sorry, Chairman, we need to do a vote on that.
I do apologise. You're absolutely right. We'll go to the vote, Rachel.
Thank you. If you could state for, against, or abstain when I call your name. Councillor Strongill.
For.
Councillor Adams.
For. 4.
Councillor Boutroy,
4.
Councillor Key,
4.
Councillor
Okay.
Purity
I've just got
Williams,
to say these bits and I'll shout.
Councillor Mrs Rawlins,
4.
Councillor Thompson,
4.
Mr Ancliffe,
4.
and Steve Larter.
4.
Thank you. That's unanimous, Chairman. I'll just confirm that the audio broadcast has ended before we carry on, if that's okay.
Thank you, Rachel.